All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Rick Reeder. I am a real estate broker here in Austin, Texas. And I put this event together because I went through some stuff with some close family members that I will describe in a little bit more detail in a minute. But consider myself to be a pretty well-educated, smart guy, but was definitely taken by surprise by a lot of the stuff that happened. Which again, we'll get into in a bit. And so, I'm lucky enough to know a couple of people who have domain expertise when it comes to folks, getting older, becoming incapacitated, and even dying. So on my left here is Jonathan Connor. He is an attorney, estate planning attorney at a law firm here in Austin, proud UT alumnus, and a good friend for probably 20 plus years. And he has done wills and trusts and powers of attorney for my family, my wife's family, and others who I've referred his way. So definitely an expert in the field. And then on my right is Ms. Shelley McAllister, and she is an expert in helping people find the right type of care for relatives as they become older and or incapacitated. And there are a lot of different types of care that are available, as I know now, and I wish I knew then. But Shelley is going to be here to help talk about what some of those options are and how to prepare yourself before it becomes an emergency. So with that, I'll kind of launch into a brief summary of my story with some close family who were in their 80s, and health was declining. The husband has Parkinson's disease, and the wife had spinal surgery and was not necessarily super fit, and so she started to lose feeling in her legs and went from a walker to a stand-up walker to a scooter, and then was having issues falling and not being able to get back up, and her husband lost the capacity to help her get up, so they were calling the fire department, and eventually it got to the point where the fire department had come out 3 times in 2 days to get her up off the floor, and they said, it's time for you to find a place with care that can help you basically around the clock, because we're not the person pickup service, we're the fire department, and we might miss a house fire or a real emergency. So that started our very urgent search for an assisted living facility for the 2 of them. And the first place we picked, we were able to get them moved in with some drama, but not worth going into a lot of detail. And then that place, they got a new director and had almost 100% staff turnover in 3 or 4 months. Was hit by lightning. The sprinklers came on and ruined all the common areas. And so it was like, okay, we got to get them out of here and find a new place. So we went on the hunt for a new place, found a brand new facility that had just been built, got them moved in there. Everything was great. Facility was great. Food was great. Staff was great. But the wife got sick and wound up in the hospital, and then in a skilled nursing facility. And while she had been able to assist with getting from the scooter to the commode and back, she had basically lost that ability. And so this facility said, I'm sorry, you cannot come back here. We're not equipped to have 2 people help you get on and off the toilet, get in the shower, etc. We're a light assisted living facility, not a full assisted living facility. So again, emergency. Her clock was running out on the skilled nursing facility she was in, so we had 3 days to find another facility, a type B, I believe it is, where they can do the full assistance. So we moved them again. And they're there now and seems to be going very well. But as you can imagine, lots of hours and a lot of stress and a lot of money to have to keep moving them. And so having lived through that, thankfully, experience, I wanted to share some of those lessons and bring some folks together who could talk more deeply about the different aspects of this kind of situation and how you can get through it. And as Scar said in The Lion King, be prepared. Thank you very much. So, Shelley, I know you're somewhat familiar with the story, and I've reminded you of some of the drama, but can you tell us what we might have done differently or better to avoid some of the situations that we found ourselves in?
So the one that comes up first is that second place that you moved into. I can't help you prepare for lightning strikes, but the second community that you moved into, knowing that one of the family members had Parkinson's and was had problems with mobility, and then the other one having a lot of problems with mobility, moving into a type A is possibly a good short-term solution if you enjoy moving a lot. Yeah. So that's the one that sticks out to me first, is just kind of trying to plan in advance as to what things might look like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, and kind of doing that, planning for that beforehand.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe go into a little detail about the different types of care facilities and what they're good for and what to look for in a facility as your parents are getting older.
Yeah, well, so I also helped a family member find a community. And when I first started, I have a master's in social work, and like Rick says, I like to think I've got at least a moderate level of intelligence. And I thought, well, this isn't going to be that hard. And yeah, it was pretty hard. So you have everything from 55 plus apartment complexes, which are just basically that. You have a lot of apartments. You don't have you have activities geared towards seniors. You have lots of amenities, and the real swank ones, lots of amenities. Then you have independent living, which independent living is going to be giving you just like a little bit more help. So usually there's 3 meals available. There's going to be housekeeping. There's going to be activities that are geared, of course. There's transportation typically offered and things like that. Then you have assisted living. You have type A, which is, you might be able to tell us more about what they can and can't do. But type A is typically, you have to be pretty self-sufficient in order to get yourself out of the building if there's a fire or something like that. But they still will offer things like medication management, which is a huge help. When families find out that they can go to a community where all of your medication can be managed, the refills and everything else, and sent to the facility instead of you as the caregiver having to do all of that, that's a huge deal. But so we have assisted living, and then and that's where in assisted living you start to bring other types of caregiving support, dressing, bathing, grooming, those kinds of things. Transfers, if you need help transferring from the chair to the bed, and those types of things. Then you have memory care, which memory care is for people that are that typically have dementia or Alzheimer's, something like that, but they're trying to leave. One thing to know is that you don't have to be in memory care if you have dementia. It's the behavior. If you're trying to leave or get out of the facility, that's the litmus so yeah.
Right.
And then, of course, you have skilled nursing facilities and nursing homes, things like that. But when you're talking about moving into a community, those are kind of the different options.
So skilled nursing and rehab facilities, those are short-term to get over an accident or fall, an illness.
Typically, yes, but sometimes if someone isn't able to afford a long-term care community like assisted living or memory care, if you're on Medicaid, sometimes that is where someone might live permanently, and that's covered by Medicaid.
Okay. Yeah, and just to clarify, the type A, type B, the facility that wasn't able to help these loved ones is a type A, and that's the light assistance. So help with dressing or light assistance with transfers, et cetera, are covered. But type B is where they could provide 2 people to come to your room and help with transfers and basically anything you need. It gets you out of the building if there's a fire, et cetera. Yeah, so that's what they're staffed for. And are there facilities where there's a spectrum of services that are offered in one place?
Oh, absolutely. So you have some places, and maybe I would have done this in your situation, some communities have independent living, assisted living, and memory care. So as time goes on, if you need more help, you can kind of move along, but you don't have to move to a completely different campus some places you can actually age in place from the apartment you move into at first until forever. Well, maybe not forever, but until And then you also have caregiving companies that can come. Like maybe you're in an independent living and you're doing pretty good, but you need just a little bit more help. You can hire a caregiving company that can come and provide a certain amount of hours of care. So that's where like working with someone like me or a local care advisor really comes into play, because you can ask all the questions as to what's going on, what are the needs, and then kind of put together what works for the person, their budget, their location, and things like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and just point of reference, these places that my loved ones are in are about $10,000 a month. So it's not cheap. So as I mentioned earlier, Jonathan, you helped my family and this other family and additional people, friends of mine, create an estate plan so that we are kind of ahead of the game when it comes to the transfer of assets and medical power of attorney for healthcare decisions in the event they're incapacitated, that kind of stuff. On that front, we're pretty well prepared. But what happens in the event that somebody is not well prepared and a loved one becomes, like a parent, becomes incapacitated or dies suddenly? What happens as far as the division of assets and responsibilities for funerals and all this kind of stuff?
Real quick before I get into that, to your point, when my father actually passed away from Alzheimer's, and what we were able to do during that time frame was actually get him into facilities just using a medical power of attorney and a financial power of attorney. So we were pretty fortunate. But one thing I would definitely double down on is having another caregiver that is going to participate in the care even when they're in the facility. So I couldn't go there all the time and be there all the time with my father. And so we hired outside help, and she was a retired nurse. I think she might have been in the Army, because she would go in there and she would tell them what to do. And she would call me and say, listen, they're over-medicating him. They're doing this wrong. You need to call them. You need to get this fixed. To have her as an advocate and to kind of be the boots on the ground when I couldn't be there was huge. So just to double down on that, that's a really, 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 really good idea. And kind of on that point as well, sticking to that, really the biggest documents for me that you need to have in play that are very, very simple are the financial power of attorney and the medical power of attorney. It's remarkable how much you can get done getting somebody into a facility just with those two documents. Now for me, it was a little easier because my dad wasn't very combative. He was argumentative. He's a retired physicist, an organist, smartest man in the room growing up. So he knew better than everybody, but we were able to get him to a point that we were able to get him into a facility. But that doesn't always happen. And so to your point, one of the things that can happen, if you reach a stage where either they're very combative or you have family members arguing over treatment, and I have one of those going right now. The mom knows her husband needs to go into a facility. He needs to. He's stage 5 Alzheimer's. He's very combative. The son doesn't live here. He doesn't help. And he doesn't think mom knows what she's doing. So we're getting ready to go into what's called a guardianship. And a guardianship is going to be in front of the probate court. Somebody files an application. I'm pretty sure the son's going to do it. And he's going to try to remove the powers of attorney that we have in place by saying, mom doesn't know what she's doing. I need to be dad's guardian. So that's one of the things that happens is you end up in a guardianship. You're in the probate court. It's very expensive. The person has to be there, the proposed ward. So this husband's going to have to be in the courtroom with his wife, with his son, in front of a judge, arguing over whether or not he should be a ward, somebody that has a guardianship over him. So that's one of the things that you'll run into that can be a real problem.
That sounds fun.
It's not, and not even for the lawyers.
Yeah. But what about kind of a non-dramatic situation? So got parents and maybe 3 kids, and one parent dies, and then after a certain period of time, the other parent dies, no will, no powers of attorney, et cetera. Can you describe a little bit about probate and how that works and how long it takes and that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So if you have a will, it's pretty straightforward in the state of Texas to go through probate. So if you don't have a will, of course, go get one. If you read about wills and probate online, discard what you read. It's not right. It's over-exaggerated. Probate in Texas takes usually, depending on the case, usually 2 to 3 months, and that's if you have a will. If you don't have a will when you die, we go through probate, but we go through it without a will. And instead of an executor being named, we end up having an administrator appointed, and you have a second lawyer called an attorney ad litem. So now you have 2 lawyers involved in the probate process. It's easily 2 times, 3 times more expensive. It takes a lot longer to go through the process. And we always say that the state of Texas has written a will for you. So it's going to say where your stuff goes. It's going to get somewhere, but it may not be where you want it to go. And so as an example, I've got a case right now. It's going on in Hays County. Second marriage, kids from the prior marriage were 30, 35 years old. They were still living off of dad. Dad gets remarried to my client. They have a 2-year-old daughter. And now dad has died. Mom co-owns the house with his other 2 worthless kids. So now they own the house together. And they're going to get part of it whenever she moves out or whenever she dies. And during the time that she lives there, they have to pay half the mortgage. Interesting. She has to pay the interest. She doesn't have to carry insurance, but she's going to. And then we have an ongoing fight as to whether or not she has to sell that house at this point in time, which she doesn't, but the other lawyer's an idiot, and he doesn't understand that yet. But I'm teaching him. So, but it's a nightmare. And if there was a will, we would have been done in 2 or 3 months. $2,500. We're about $20,000 into it now. And this is a lady raising a 2-year-old on her own. So that is one of the examples of what can happen if you don't have a will in place.
Thank you, sir. One final question for you. Can you explain a little bit about the difference between a will and a trust? And when would you want to have a trust instead of a will?
So going back to the internet search, if you read about trusts online, just discard that. Again, it's oversold. Probate, as I mentioned, in Texas, it's not terribly difficult to go through. But if you have a trust and it's properly funded and properly used, you can avoid going through probate. So I always use the example of your home. If you die, you have a will, you're on the deed with your wife or your husband, and you want to change ownership of any of your assets, probate's the process to do that. That's how you change ownership from the person who died to the people who are the beneficiaries in the will. So what we do ahead of time is we create a trust, and you put your assets into that trust during your lifetime. So the trust owns your assets, technically. It's not exactly right, but I'll use it for now. So the trust owns it. When you die, there's no need to go through probate if it's done correctly, because the trust owns it. The decedent, the person who died, does not. So there's no need to go in front of the court. You don't have to. And so that is a very general overview. It's a probate avoidance technique to have a living trust in place. Again, careful what you read online. If you want good information, talk to me. I can give you an overview in 10 minutes of really what the pros and cons are. The other reason that we use trust that's important is in the state of Texas, if you receive Medicaid, the way Medicaid gets paid back when somebody dies is through probate. And so you think, well, I paid into Medicaid. Well, you did, but the government still wants you to pay them back if you ever use it. And so if you go through probate and you've received Medicaid, the government gets to be involved, and I have to notify them, and they can come in and make a claim against the probate estate. And that's only through probate, and that's way back. Governor Perry fought with the federal government over this for years, and this was the solution, because we didn't want the government to get it at all. And this was kind of the mediated deal. They weren't going to give us funding for highways or something if we didn't work something out. So you can avoid that issue as well if you have a trust. You don't have to worry about repaying Medicaid. And so that's another good reason to have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Shelley, how does one know when it's time to start thinking about potential new facilities, and how do you manage a loved one that maybe isn't really feeling ready, or working through that process of maybe selling the idea?
So if you're here, or if you have a senior loved one, or you're getting closer to being a senior loved one yourself, then it's probably time to start planning and thinking about it. The last thing you want to do is make these decisions in an emergency. We can help you do that. A good local placement agent can help you do that, and we can totally do that. But it just adds a whole nother layer of stress that's unnecessary. But when you start thinking about, okay, I'm planning, but when is it, we're at the precipice. What's the next step? If your loved one is being hospitalized over and over again, lots of falls, you go over to the house and you see that they're really not cleaning. Maybe they're not eating. Maybe they're starting to lose some weight. They're not eating like they used to. Maybe they keep falling victim to some financial scams. They're just not really able to manage their money. Just these signs, it's called instrumental activities of daily living, that it might be time, like taking care of the house inside and outside, things that maybe your dad used to be the best gardener and kept the house looking really nice, and it's just getting older and not able to do that anymore. And so those are some of the signs. Lots of different hospitalizations and things like that. Yeah.
And then what about if they're not really interested in taking your advice on
So
it
one
might
of the
be time for you to move?
So one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, my mom said, don't put me in a home. Please don't put me in a home. I promised them 10 years ago I would never put them in a home. What you might think of as a home, like what I used to think of the options were, is that you stayed at home or you went to a nursing home, and those were the two options. There's a lot of other options now. And I kind of say it's like, I like to compare it to like hotel chains. When you're looking at some of the different types of communities I mentioned earlier, you could have a Days Inn type environment where you've got a bed, you've got a key, you're not going to be wowed by the continental breakfast if they have one in the morning, but it's there, so you've got water and all those things, you're fine, you're safe, it's fine. Then you have the West End, then you have the Four Seasons. And when you start thinking about these communities, the look, the feel, the amenities, how it's decorated, the food, the activities, and I've got a list I'm going to read from because there's so many cool things I couldn't remember them all. But there's just what people think in their heads is what it would feel like or look like, or what the experience would be like, is probably different than what it actually is. And a lot of times when we go on tours, because we go tour with families after we make some recommendations, most of the time, very rarely do they say, well, that was awful. Oh, that's terrible. They're like, gosh, I didn't know. I wonder if I can live here one day. And it's really kind of things like that. So,
Yeah, I can tell you while you get your list out, the second stop in our journey, it was like being at an all-inclusive in Mexico or something. I mean, a brand new building, 4 stories, very bright, everything new. Food was amazing. Activities, pool, burger bar, like it was.
They call that a cruise ship on land, and there are some of those in the Austin area. Yeah. So these are some of. I'm not saying that these activities. This is going to be not cruise ship on land, but Westin Plus maybe, if you're thinking about it. But these are some of the things that they have: Candy Bingo, Garden Club, Color Me Calm, German Speakers Circle, a lecture on World Heritage. Let's see, categories, all the Longhorn football games every Saturday. I mean, movies, all sorts of exercise. This one in particular has an indoor pool. There's a lot of different things, and a lot of these in the good places, in the places that are able to that manage in this way at least. They listen to residents. If a resident is really interested in teaching people, they have guitar lessons because they have a few residents that play guitar and they want to teach other people how to do it. So they'll listen to them. So I think it's more just the putting that at bay and saying, let's just go look. And then once a family can narrow down a couple of places, what we'll do with the person, if they're kind of hesitant, is let's go have lunch. Let's go do an activity and just go check it out. And they might realize I'm not going in a home. So, yeah.
I just wanted to jump in real quick on the timing piece for me. Capacity. That's it. That's the big one for me. I have one going right now where I have a trust. It needed to be revised. We needed to do it. The husband was pushing back. I felt like he really was having some difficulties, but he was very communicative, and you could talk to him about anything. But I would talk to him 30 minutes later, and I realized he doesn't remember anything we just talked about. So capacity is a big thing as well. If you start noticing that your parents are, and forgetfulness is not necessarily it, right? Believe it or not, for this gentleman, we got it done. Because all I had to prove to the court was when I spoke to him, he understood. He understood who his kids were. He understood what he was doing. He fully got it. He forgot it 30 minutes later, but he could understand the transaction. And for me, that's the big deal. So memory isn't necessarily the test here, but you need to be really watchful and see what your parents are doing. The scamming thing for elderly people now is massive. I have clients call me every quarter, Jonathan, I just got a notice from a lawyer in the UK, and I am the bounty of a baron from 100 years ago, and I've looked into it, and I call them, and I write them, and I say, this is not true. It's a scam. And they will call me back 2 weeks later. Are you sure? Are you sure? And they really firmly believe it. So anyway, I just wanted to add, capacity for me is a big thing. If you come to me too late and they don't have legal capacity to sign things, we're kind of out of luck.
Yeah, I was going
Thanks
to
for the
ask
interruption.
that follow-up is what does happen. So if you have one parent living and that parent starts to kind of slip mentally, and then you don't have powers of attorney in place or a will or a trust or any of those kinds of things, and then it's like, oh, shoot, they're really not capable of being in the moment and making a decision. They don't understand fully what's going on. Is that where you have to go through that guardianship process in order to get them into a memory care facility, or because they can't sign anything for themselves legally, right? They're not capable.
So getting into a facility and actually doing planning are a little bit different. So, for example, you can typically get somebody into a facility. They work with you pretty well. They understand this scenario. If you have powers of attorney, great. If you don't, there's still ways that you can actually get somebody into a facility without having to go all the way to the level of a guardianship. For me, the guardianships come into play when it's, again, combative. Or in my other case, I've got the son saying one thing and the mom saying something different. So you can work around it. The biggest thing for me, capacity-wise, is I can't do anything to change the disposition of your estate at all, and you're stuck. It's just not going to change. And I might end up in a guardianship, and if you haven't told me ahead of time who you want that guardian to be, then, and listen, the declaration of guardianship is 2 paragraphs. Simple, notarized, you're done. You can say, if I need a guardian, this is the person to do it ahead of time. And the courts will honor that unless, something's very unusual. But if you don't have that, you're going to end up in a fight like my clients are right now. Yeah. And if you don't have your planning done and you don't have legal capacity, that's it. You're done.
Right. Another personal story. My father passed away a few years ago, and they had a will. It was very straightforward. If my mother survived him, then she got everything, and if not, then the kids split it evenly. But we had decided with her that the best thing to do was sell the house that they had lived in Waco, and for her to move closer to my brother and his 4 kids and their 4 kids, so have a lot of family around. And we wanted to get this in motion pretty quickly. So talking with the title company in Waco, they said if you can do affidavits of heirship, then we don't have to wait for probate to close. So that was news to me, which is great because I had, intelligent people I was working with. But can you talk about, I guess, parents pass away and you're trying to sell a home to get access to the money so that you could check into the right facility or whatever. What are some of the options that are available in the event that you don't have a will, or if you don't have the ability or it's contentious around the affidavits of heirship? What's that process?
So you can fight an affidavit of heirship just like you would fight the probate of a will. You can come in and make similar types of arguments. Just so you know, what an affidavit of heirship does is it's the way I do my affidavit of heirship is I actually have a family member identify who the person is, who they were married to, who their children are, who their heirs at law, all of that information, and I have them do it. So it's a family member. Then I have two people who are fully disinterested, not the son-in-law, not the daughter-in-law. I mean, somebody really, just a neighbor, coworker, somebody like that. They actually sign a separate affidavit of heirship saying the same thing and also acknowledging what he or she said, we agree with. That seems to work really well with title companies. Now, title companies can choose whether to honor it or not. And so in Texas, an affidavit of heirship for changing title on real estate has to actually be on file for, it's either 5 or 7 years for it to legally show an acknowledgement of chain of title. Title companies, the underwriters will sometimes look past that if they're confident it's okay, and they'll still underwrite it. And so you can use that in certain instances to change. The issue is, who are the heirs, right? Yeah. It may not be who you wanted it to be, but those are the people who will get it. It's a similar, the DMV has one for cars, by the way. You can change title to vehicles when somebody dies, and it's an affidavit of heirship produced by the DMV. You fill it out. It's very similar. You submit that, and you can change the title, but it has to be into the name of the heirs. Again, it can't be to your brother Bob or somebody else. So those are the only restrictions that I see being the biggest issues. Who are the heirs?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just a chance for a final statement, and then we'll take some audience questions. For me, I'm learning up here on stage right now. Is so much information to digest, and I think, as I mentioned at the very beginning, you don't want to be trying to learn this in an emergency where you've got 2 days or 3 days to find a facility, or somebody passes away unexpectedly and you don't know if they had a will or not. So, take this opportunity to sit down with your loved ones, your family members, and say, here's what I learned today, and here's what we can do about making sure that this doesn't happen to us. I don't know, Shelley, if you had anything to add, and then we'll take some questions.
I would say that the just a final tip that's sticking in my head is that when you get to this point and you're like, okay, I know something needs to change. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know we need to start talking. Reach out to a local advisor. Don't go to the internet and put your information on a website and press enter, submit, send, whatever, because you will be bombarded with a lot of different companies asking you questions that you have no idea what the answers are. Like, when do you want to move? Well, I didn't even know that that's what I signed up for. I'm still trying to figure out what the options are. So work with someone locally that really understands the any care histories of the communities, what's going on with management, what's going on with, different ownership changes and things like that.
Lightning strikes.
That's probably more a divine one, but work with someone that knows what's, yeah. And side note, we don't cost families anything. So that also is a lot of people go, oh, thank goodness, because they don't even know necessarily what they're signing up when they start wanting to work with me. Like, I don't even know what I would try to pay for because I don't know what the options are. So yeah, stay with the local agent.
Full disclosure, I was here to listen to Shelley. I really was. I met her one time over lunch, and she's just a wealth of information. We didn't have that when my father was being put into a facility, and the first one he went into was not for memory care. And I mentioned he was an engineer and a physicist. He kept breaking out, and they couldn't figure out how. And he had a little bracelet on, the perimeter bracelet. Broke out again, and he hid his toenail clippers in his sock drawer. And that's how he kept breaking out. So I wish I had talked to you first, because they didn't do anything about it. They were pretty kind of like, well, we found him at Mesa Drive, and it's okay. It's a little different. So I'm really glad to be listening to you here today, Shelley. My only kind of closing comment would be candor. And don't be scared to talk about it. People are so terrified to have the conversation. I've had it with my son. I mean, my whole family's had Alzheimer's. By the time I'm at 70, I'm probably going to have it. It's just kind of the way it's going to be. I have an 18-year-old son. He knows all about it. I told him, here's what's going to happen. With my trust, I'm like, I'm going to make you the trustee in like 5 years, and you just cut me a check every month and let me go do my thing. But you have to have those conversations. If you don't, it delays, it delays, it delays, and does not get done. It just doesn't get done. And so that would be one of my things. Be candid about it. It's hard with some families. They just don't do it. My family never talked. My wife's family, Brig knows my wife, they talk, they yell, they scream, and they figure it all out, and they get it done. I wouldn't yell or scream, but be direct. Sit down and have the hard conversation. If you need me in that conversation, I'll be there, and I can always play the bad cop. I really do. They blame it on the lawyer all the time. And it works out really, really well. It takes the pressure off. So that's it. Candor. Really have the conversation.
Embrace the suck, because this suck is way better than the last-minute emergency suck.
Yeah.
Yeah. So got time for questions. Does anybody have any audience questions? Yes, ma'am.
I actually have two for Shelley. One is, if you're in a different state looking for care that you provide, what do you look up? What kind of Google search?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, so your question is, are you saying if you have a loved, like you're here and your loved one is in Colorado and you're not sure? Yeah, so I'm biased, but I would go to carepatrol.com and put in a zip code and see if there's a local agent that serves that zip code or that community that can help you with that search. You can always reach out to me, and I can do some of that legwork too and get you to the right person. But yeah, that's what I would do.
And then
Yeah.
the other question is, if you have loved ones that want to stay in their house for as long as possible, what kind of services are available for them to bring to their house until it's time to visit?
Yeah, there's care. So we have relationships with.
Sorry. So the question
sorry.
was, if you have a loved one.
If
that
you want to
wants-
stay at home as long as possible, can services come to you? Absolutely. There are caregiving companies that can come to you and do dressing, bathing, food prep, helping with those kinds of things. So caregiving companies, hospice can come out to your home. There's home health. And I didn't even talk about that. Home health, all those are in the communities too. You have all of those services in the communities too. But if you want to talk about that and just kind of get connected to companies that we trust, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to put you in contact, because that's what happens when people call. Like the number, I think I already said number one, but this is like, don't put me in a home and I'm just getting started. I don't even know. I just knew I should call. So if you're like, I don't even know, just call and I can kind of help. If it's staying at home as long as possible, I'll put you in contact with companies that can help you do that.
Great questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have in-laws where my father-in-law is starting to really go downhill. And my mother-in-law is probably only 5 years younger, but is much healthier, much more with it. She's actually the one who's interested in going into a facility because she likes all the activities, the social stuff, and she recognizes that she's going to need a lot of help. But my question is about these progressive places. Is it like a physical relocation at each declining step, and what happens if the two parents are not at the same level?
So it depends. But the question was, if you have one loved one that is starting to cognitively and physically decline at a much faster rate than someone else, like what are the options? It really does depend on the community. But I mean, if it's a situation where one person maybe just needs a little bit of caregiving help or really can live independently and the other one's trying to leave the building, then they probably will need to be separated. But there are 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartments in some of these communities, and some of them are specifically designed to move into one apartment and stay there, unless you have like that, what we call elopement risk, where someone's trying to leave. So it really depends on if in your scenario, if the lady is, you said she's interested in moving in with her husband, like they could absolutely live in an apartment together. And there's still going to be caregiving that comes in and helps and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I'll tell you, in my family, the loved one example from the very beginning, the facility they're in now has different levels of care depending on your needs. So they're in the same apartment and they pay base rent, and then she's level 4, needs 2 people to help her do transfers, full medication management, et cetera, and he's level 0 because he can still get around himself, dress himself, take a shower, et cetera. So her monthly fee is higher than his monthly fee, but they just roll it all up and they live in the same unit.
So the apartment will have like one fee, and then you'll have a second occupant, like a second companion fee. And then, just like Rick said, you have different levels of care. So some of them have different levels of care. Some communities have a point system, so it's just based almost like a la carte. But yeah, so you can live in the same place.
Great, good question. Any other question? Go ahead.
Is it ever too late to create a trust with remaining assets?
Is it ever too late to create a trust?
Only if you don't have the legal capacity to do it. That's the primary concern, is whether or not there's legal capacity to actually do that. In the legal capacity for doing a trust, because a trust in this case would be considered like a testamentary instrument, similar to a will. So the capacity to do a will is actually a lower level of capacity than other areas of law. And then you have contractual capacity, which is very different. So there are times we can, like the instance I talked about earlier, have a trust done where this gentleman was actually stage 4 Alzheimer's, but he had the wherewithal to go ahead and do it because, in my opinion, he had the capacity to understand what he was doing. So capacity is one big hurdle. The second hurdle has to do with whether or not you're trying to qualify for Medicaid, because there are look-back rules. So if you create a trust and you fund it, and then the next year you're trying to get Medicaid, they're going to go, no. It doesn't work that way. So if you don't do it early enough on, you won't be eligible for Medicaid. You can still get it. You just have to wait a certain period of time. I believe it's 3 years.
Yeah, good question. You in the back.
This is for Jonathan. So I have come to learn that my dad is in his late 80s, and I am a co-executor and a co-guardian in his will, along with my stepmother, who I get along with. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
So the question was, the gentleman is co-executor and co-guardian in his father's testamentary documents. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Do you want to answer that?
I'm going to say bad idea.
he's kind of there. I really discourage co-executors. I have one going right now, and you know where it always happens. It has to do with love and emotion, and that's fair. I have one where the mom just had to name her 3 daughters as co-executors. They all have lawyers, including me. It's horrible, and it's really problematic. I would say, though, majority of the time it works out okay. And usually when somebody is coming to my office and they're co-executors in a will, I'm suggesting one of them bow out. And, maybe they don't, maybe they do, but if I can get one to bow out, the understanding is it's better to have one person at the helm through this whole thing. It just really is. But if one bows out, it's not like the other one isn't entitled to accountings, to know what's going on, and being part of the process. So for your particular case, especially if you get along, I don't think I would push the issue and say, you really need to resolve this and have us named, in order. Is probably going to work out okay.
If I did do that, that would be taken care of through like a codicil?
You can do that with a codicil, absolutely. And for what he asked if you can do something with a codicil related to a will. A codicil is an amendment to a will. It's just the fancy word that we like to use for amendment. But a codicil, you can modify the will doing it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, in business, we like to say if you have 2 leaders, you probably have 0. So you pick somebody to be on point and let them roll. Yeah. Yes, in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Well, full disclosure, I work with Shelby, but I swear I learn something every day in this industry. So I have a medical power of attorney question. So recently I went through a little crisis with my own mother. I did not have the access to speak to any of her doctors. And
That's a really good point. So to kind of reiterate what she asked, she's asking if you have a medical power of attorney, if it doesn't have HIPAA language in it, are you going to be able to, do what you need to do and act on behalf of somebody who's incapacitated? So with the medical power of attorney, first of all, it only comes into play when you're incapacitated. And a financial power of attorney, on the other hand, can be based on incapacity or be immediate. So with the medical power of attorney, when we do them, we actually bury HIPAA language into it. And I think even if I went and looked at the statute, there's a form in the statute you can see. I believe it even has the HIPAA language built into it, so it should be in there. But one thing to point out is with the HIPAA release, I always do a separate one as well. So in my case, I had 2 siblings. I still do, but I have 2 siblings. One of them is named as the agent in the medical power of attorney. If we don't have a separate HIPAA release that said the 3 of us could talk to the doctors, he's doing his thing. We can't ever speak to the physicians or the medical providers. So I make sure you have those separated. But if you're named in the medical power of attorney, I almost guarantee you there's HIPAA language built inside it.
Good question. What's the difference between a medical power of attorney, a financial power of attorney, a general durable power of attorney, et cetera?
Et cetera, et cetera.
There are a lot of them.
There are. So medical power of attorney, we just talked about if you can't make your medical decisions because you're incapacitated. The person you've named as your agent, they make those medical decisions for you, just like if you were still able to do so. One thing to always be watchful for is whether they have a directive to physicians as well. People know that as a living will. It's not a will. It's not living. Our joke here in Texas is that that name came from California, where all the weird laws show up. So it's not what it is, but if you Google living will, you're going to get a lot of information. But it's an advanced directive. You're not naming somebody to do something, but you're saying if I have a terminal condition or an irreversible condition, I want life support withheld and to be able to pass away naturally. If that's in place, it trumps the medical power of attorney. Now, it doesn't mean the doctor is walking into the family going, I got a directive, nobody, I'm pulling the plug. Doesn't work that way. There's a full discussion, and there's participation when that happens. The financial power of attorney, the fancy name for that is a statutory durable power of attorney. And it's actually built into the Texas Estates Code as well, or Texas Property Code. That, as I mentioned earlier, can take place right now, immediately. So you can sign it, and the agent in that power of attorney will actually be able to handle your finances right here, right now. Or it can be what we call a springing power, and that is the same as the medical. It doesn't allow the agent to do anything until you are actually incapacitated. So most of you right now are thinking, well, I'll just make it the latter. Wait till I'm incapacitated. Don't do that. Make it effective immediately. If I go to a physician and I tell him or her, listen, I need you to declare this guy incapacitated because I got to go move a bunch of money around, they freak out. And they should, because they've been sued over and over and over and over again. They don't like to declare you incapacitated. So that's a problem, and it can take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, or we're doing a guardianship. So make it effective immediately, and you don't have to give it to your agent. But then if they have to act, they just grab it. They don't have to go get you declared incapacitated or disabled. They can take care of you right away. We don't have to worry about that doctor. And the last piece of that is, listen, if you don't trust them when you're incapacitated, why would you trust them when you have capacity? Don't put them in the document if you're not willing to make them immediately able to handle your paperwork. Those are the powers of attorney, the directive to physicians. I talked a little bit about the declaration of guardian earlier. So many lawyers don't do that. It's just ridiculous. I mentioned it's 2 paragraphs long. Get that done. Most of you probably don't have it. Most of you may have a will, financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney, the living will probably. If you've got those, great. Get the declaration of guardian done as well. The living trust, if you want to call and talk to me for 10 or 15 minutes about the pros and cons of living trust, I'm happy to go through that with you, and I don't charge a penny to do that. I love educating people on those. they can be really, really, really beneficial. They can really help out. But there's a lot to digest there as to what's good and bad. You're going to do a lot of work now because you're going to have to do transfers and ownership changes, things like that. But you're doing it so your loved ones don't have to do it after you die. It's as simple as that.
That's the legal version of Swedish death cleaning. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's a TV show. And it's a tradition, I guess, in Sweden, where as you're getting older and you have a 5-bedroom house full of stuff, and you use the kitchen, the living room, and your bedroom, is get rid of that stuff now. I know some people that have 2 storage units, big ones, $900 a month, full of stuff that they will probably never lay eyes on again. And their trustee is going to get to manage that when they pass. So
I had a client die, and he had 12 gun safes full of guns. Each one held up to 50. Yeah. You never know what you're going to find.
that's a lot of guns, even for Texas.
His wife didn't know about it, by the way. No, she said no more guns in the house, so he put the gun safes at his office in the basement. And he died, and she called me, "You would not believe what he has." I said, "Let me come look."
All right, but just a minute or two. Is there any more question? Yes.
Earlier, you were talking about if a will's in Texas, it's pretty straightforward for probate. So my father-in-law, we moved him from Florida a couple years ago, so he's been living here. And I'll double check everything. He has a will, but do you have to update it and change it now that he's here for that to be a simple process? Or is the fact that he used to live in a different state, even though he lives here now, make that different?
If you can get it to me for a quick review, I can tell you. But most likely it's fine. Full faith and credit clause in the U.S. Constitution means that we have to recognize the laws of other states when it comes to wills and other laws. So generally it's not a problem because of the federal law. And in Texas, you can actually probate what we call a foreign will. And foreign is just outside of Texas. It doesn't mean it has to be, in Europe or something. I'm probating a will that was done in Singapore. It's the craziest will I've ever read. It is super cool. And it's only 1 page, which is remarkable because mine are like 20. But it's gonna get probated. We have issues, don't get me wrong. There's going to be a lot of problems. But probably you're going to be okay. The one state just to worry about is Louisiana. And I'm not making a joke. I have friends from Louisiana. I'll make an LSU joke any day you want. But Louisiana is based on Napoleonic law. It's not based on British law. And it's the only state in the Union that's like that. So their rules on how to execute a will are a little bit different. Not a lot, but a little bit.
All right, thank you very much. We're right up against the hour, so I wanted to make a disclaimer on behalf of my co-panelists. This is not legal advice. Jonathan Connor's not your attorney, and I'm not your real estate broker yet, but you can call me. And then Shelley obviously is not giving individual advice to anybody in this panel discussion. We hope everyone learned a lot, and feel free to stick around and introduce yourselves to any of the panelists. And thanks to our hosts at the Rosette and Austin Classical Guitar.
Okay, sorry. One more thing. So when we were talking about this event and planning, I reached out to a colleague of mine, Jeremiah, and because we were talking about not just planning for where you're going to move to, do you have all the documents and all the legal things involved, but also what are you going to do with your house? People call me and they'll ask, like, what are we going to do with our house? So Jeremiah with the new construction is one of our generous sponsors, and he was going to come up and just talk to a few minutes about what he does. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelley. So again, my name's Jeremiah. My business is called Anew Remodeling, and really what we focus on is those transactions that occur, well, like what Rick does all the time. He helps people sell and buy homes, and a lot of times there's value to be had with strategic renovations and remodeling, that kind of thing. But we've come to realize that there's an enormous value for folks exactly in the situation we've been talking about today. In having just completed a remodel on a house after it went through probate, don't wait till then. That's painful. We had one about a year ago where man passed away. It was a house that was on the lake, should have sold for $1.5 million, about, according to the realtor, but it hadn't been touched in about 30 years. So every piece of the aesthetic screamed 1990, and there were 6 heirs. And you want to try to convince 6 people squabbling over an estate to spend $150,000 on a property that they have no emotional attachment to? Good luck. So they sold it for about $500,000 less than it should have sold for, simply because they couldn't agree on what to do. So in addition to enormous lost value by not being proactive, you also have you've got all the opportunity that you missed if you hadn't done it ahead of time. So what did you say, $10,000 a month on a care facility, if I can use that term? But that's an example, right? Well, I had a client earlier this year, and she was declining in health, and her only asset was her home in South Austin. No debt on it. Good for her. She'd lived there 30 years. And she called her realtor and said, hey, I'd like to sell the house. Well, as you kind of alluded to, sometimes in that stage in life, the care for the home goes down. You know, she had pets and she wasn't able to keep it as clean as she wanted to, and the condition of the home degraded pretty substantially. The realtor said, look, if we try to sell this right now, you know, we'll spend maybe $500, have someone come in and clean it and just list it. We're going to list at about $375,000, and it's going to take a minute to sell. But it's called Jeremiah. So I went over and I walked through it real slowly with her. She was real nervous and not sure. She said, I don't really have the money for a remodel. Don't worry, we got financing options. So she didn't have to pay a penny out of pocket. We were able to finance about a $60,000 renovation on the home, and finished up in late March, listed 25 days on market, and then under contract, which is pretty good for that time. In that zip code, the average in March was about 60 days. So we were about half the normal time on market, and it closed at $550,000. So these strategic renovations and remodels, you know, typically we're not looking at, you know, knock down walls and build new bathrooms. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about all the aesthetic things that help a home to sell. And so far in 2024, people who have worked with me prior to listing their home for sale have averaged a net return of 205%. So if they invest, we'll say $50,000 in a home remodel, they're going to have a net return after all expenses and everything of just over $100,000 of additional revenue that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So this is a really, really big opportunity for folks. But carrying with the theme of the day, be proactive, because you don't want to try to fight that out after probate. And especially you'll have missed the opportunity to possibly use that accrued value to have a much better end-of-life care situation. So,
No, I'm Rick Reeder, and I approve that message.
thanks, Rick. Thank you,
All
Sharon.
right. Well, thank you all again for coming. Stick around. Appreciate. Thanks to our hosts at the Rosette, Austin Classical Guitar. Oh, door prizes. Christian, do you have the sheets? You can kill the video. Thank you. Okay. He's grabbing the sheets. Must be present to win. Don't go too far. Mix them up a little bit. Take a sheet, any sheet.
The lawyer's going to be doing this. I love that. Yeah, you trust me. I love it.
This is for the organizing. This is for Bluebird organizing.
Bluebird organizing.
Okay, Griffin Shinks.
Griffin.
This is for a half day of organizing with Bluebird organizing. If you've met Terry Rickard, you are in for a treat. She is.
And for the iPad. No peeking. Rick Reeder. Thank you.
Fernandez.
Maria. Yay, congratulations. All right, thanks everybody again. Come talk with us in the hallway.
Thank you, everybody.